I'm DJ Psyched, and you're watching the Get Psyched YouTube channel. Let's get psyched about YouTube. I'm DJ Psyched, this is Ángel, and today I want to talk about a few things you should know before you get a leopard gecko. Ángel here is a little over 5 months old, and I've had him since he was a little baby. I've learned a lot about geckos in my time of having him, but I'm not an expert. This is not a care guide. I wanted to make this video today because I have learned a lot from my 5 months in keeping Ángel, and there's a lot that I know now that I didn't know at all before I got him. And I just wanted to make this video for anyone who wants to get a leopard gecko or is thinking of getting a leopard gecko. I think something we all hear when we want to get a pet from a lot of people is do your research, which you should. You absolutely should do your research before you get any kind of pet. But if you're new to something, it can be kind of hard to know where to start and what you should know. What's the most important stuff? What is this research you're doing? What is the information you're looking for? And so today I want to talk about some things you should know about if you want to keep a leopard gecko. What should you be doing your research on? What should you be focusing on? So I'm just going to give some groundwork on some things you should know about before getting a leopard gecko. But like I said, you should do further research into all of these topics before getting a gecko. But hopefully this will help you decide if you want to do all of that work and if this is the animal for you. First and foremost, you should know the basics of how a leopard gecko needs to be cared for and what their environment's like. If you're still deciding if you want a gecko, think about certain things like their handleability. What's their diet like? What kind of temperatures do they need? Lighting situation, space, how much money is one gonna cost? What's their sleep cycle like? It's good to learn these basics about a gecko before you get them because you want to understand what they're gonna be like. What are they gonna be like as pets? So I will say Ángel amazing to handle. Leopard geckos are great handling pets. I've had Ángel since he was a baby, like I said, and when he was a baby, he wasn't well tamed. He was a baby. He hadn't been handled by humans much, so he wasn't really tamed, but it wasn't hard at all to tame him. I just picked him up for like 15 minutes a day, and he's acclimated to a point now where he's happy to come out. He doesn't have any problems. He'll chill like this all the time. He comes out very willingly. He just is calm. He doesn't run. He doesn't scratch. He's never pooped or peed on me, and he's never bitten me through handling. He's very easy to handle. So leopard geckos are good to handle. Another really important thing to consider is their diet. You're going to have to feed your gecko. These are insectivores. They're going to eat live insects only. So you're going to have to keep live insects to feed them. That means keeping things like maybe crickets or worms or roaches, and you have to make sure that's something you're okay with before you think about getting a leopard gecko because you have to feed them, and so you have to be okay with their food, and not just being okay with them. I'll talk more about it later, but you have to be okay with taking care of their food as well. The temperatures are not really that hard to acclimate for a leopard gecko, but it is something you have to think about. They need a temperature gradient. That, like everything else, is something you should research and learn about yourself for a gecko, finding out what you think the best way to heat them is. I currently use a heat mat and a heat lamp so that Ángel can have a nice temperature gradient in there and have a few spots that are a little warmer for when he wants it and a little cooler when he needs it. So he has a nice gradient going, and that's how I do it. But there are things like deep heat projectors, and there are other ways you could heat your leopard gecko's enclosure, so that's just another thing that you would have to do research on. Some people say they need UVB, some people say they don't. These are the kinds of things you have to think about when you want to get a leopard gecko. So space is another thing, and it's not a big deal with leopard geckos, but it's something you do have to consider when you're getting a pet. Do you have the space for it? Do you have somewhere you can keep him? He stays in that nice 40-gallon right behind us, but adult leopard geckos, most people will say a 20-gallon is just fine. I went with the 40 because I like it, and if you do the enclosure correctly, I think it could just be enriching for their lives. But that's something you should do more research on. Decide how you want to house your leopard geckos. Some people will keep their leopard geckos in a 20-gallon their whole life. Some people, like me, like to give them a little bit more room and just spend a little extra time trying to make sure that it's a good place for them. Another big one, which kind of ties into all of that, is money. You have to pay for the food. You have to pay for hides. You have to pay for a terrarium. You have to pay for the gecko itself. Leopard geckos themselves are really not that expensive, especially depending on where you get them, which, if you're brand new to this, I just want to say that in my opinion and a lot of people's opinion, you shouldn't buy a leopard gecko from PetSmart or Petco or any of those big pet chain stores. There are lots of videos on YouTube about why, but I'm just going to say that I completely agree. You shouldn't buy from those kinds of places. I did buy Ángel from PetSmart, and I regret that decision. And I know that sounds kind of harsh. I'm really glad that I have Ángel, and I do love him, but there are reasons why you don't want to support some place like PetSmart or Petco, even though you might say, well, I'm rescuing this animal from those harsh environments. What actually is happening is by supporting them, they're able to continue doing this to pets, and what they do to pets, it's bad. These big companies have been called out for the way they treat pets, but because they still make money, they can still do it. So you just don't want to support that kind of thing. You want to get your gecko from a reputable place or a reputable breeder, someone that you know is taking care of the animals that they're breeding. But even so, leopard geckos are not expensive. So geckos themselves aren't expensive, but like any pet, the cost can add up depending on the kind of insects you want to get, how you're going to get them. I like to get my food delivered to me because it's easier. There's nowhere around me that sells good dubia roaches, so I get them off of dubiaroach.com, and it costs a little bit of money because I have to pay for the food delivery, and dubias are more expensive than crickets. But I hate keeping crickets, so I go for dubias. And that's something you have to learn about. When you keep insects, you'll find out what insects you like and don't like. Most people do not like keeping crickets because they are smelly, they are hard to keep, they jump all over the place, they will escape and end up in your home. I like dubia roaches because they don't smell, they're not hard to take care of at all, and they won't just escape and end up everywhere. And that's something you have to consider, like I said. You got to take care of these insects. You have to feed them. You have to clean their enclosures too. They are like keeping another animal. So when you're keeping a leopard gecko, it's not just the gecko you're taking care of. It's also the insects, and you have to pay for that. You have to pay for their home. You have to pay for food for them. So even though it's not the most expensive thing in the world, having a leopard gecko really hasn't broken the bank. It isn't cheap. That's something to remember. It is going to cost money, and you should think about that, especially because whenever you get a pet, you should think about the fact that if the day came where you would need a vet, you have to pay for that vet, and exotic vets aren't cheap. So that's something to consider when you're going to get a leopard gecko. Would you pay for an exotic vet trip? Could you afford that if it happened? Another thing about leopard geckos to consider before you get one is that they're crepuscular. They're up at night and at dawn, but they're asleep like all day. If you're the kind of person who wants a pet that you can play with during the day, a leopard gecko might not be the best for you because you're really not going to see them all throughout the day. This is my first time playing with Ángel today and hanging out with him because he's been hiding in his rock all day, and it's like past 10 p.m. Leopard geckos just like to sleep all day, so that's something to consider. I feed Ángel after 8 p.m. every day. Just kind of consider that. Consider the hours they're awake and asleep because you're going to have to plan their cleaning their stuff or giving them food around their sleep schedule. You don't want to keep disturbing your gecko. You're not going to wake it up in the middle of the day to feed it. So it's something to consider. Something I think you should know before you get a leopard gecko is what age leopard gecko do you want to get? Do you want to get a full-grown adult or do you want to get a baby? It does make a difference. Like with any animal, a baby leopard gecko is going to eat a little differently. They're going to eat more frequently. They're going to have to eat smaller insects. They're going to be harder to tame. And depending on what research you do and what you decide, you might want to put your baby leopard gecko in a smaller home and then upgrade later on, which might cost a little bit of money. Although some people say you could skip right into a 20-gallon. Like I said, you got to do your research and decide what you want to do. I put Ángel in a smaller home until he got a little bigger. And so that cost a little extra money, because I had to buy his first home, set it up, and then build him a second home once he was a little older. And he grows pretty fast, so he was only in that 10-gallon for like 3 months before it was too small for him. An adult leopard gecko is going to eat way less frequently, and they're going to eat bigger insects. You're not going to need to keep as many insects once they get older because they're not going to eat as frequently. They eat a couple times a week as opposed to every single day eating tiny insects as babies, meaning you have to have a bunch of tiny insects at access, which is a lot harder because in order to have the right size food, you can't have the food too long because insects do grow. And so it's just something to consider. Do you want a baby? Do you want an adult? Do your research because there are slight differences in taking care of both of them. There is something really rewarding about raising a little leopard gecko from baby to adult. You get to watch them grow. You get to see their personality change. Ángel has changed so much. I'll link it here if you want to watch an update I did on Ángel growing up and how he's changed. But he was so different. He looked different. He acted different. He's a different little boy. And so that was incredibly rewarding, but it is something to think about. There's also sexing that goes along with that. You should consider the fact that females will lay eggs and that maybe you should learn a little bit about that if you want a female leopard gecko. And if you get a baby leopard gecko, you're not going to know what gender you get until the leopard gecko grows up. You can't tell when they're babies. So if you want to get a specific gender, then you're probably better off getting an adult. But I have Ángel here and I'm not even 1,000% sure of Ángel's gender yet because he's not quite old enough for me to be certain, but I think Ángel's a little boy, so we'll see if I'm right. So the key to this video is do your research on all these topics. There's so many more topics you can consider. There's the substrate you need to put in their home. There's how you're going to feed them. You have to dust your insects. You have to learn about all these things in order to get a leopard gecko. Something that I took away from having Ángel for this long is that it's constant learning, constant development. Once you know all the basics, you have the terrarium set up, you have a good substrate, your gecko's eating well because you have the right insects, you're dusting the insects, the temperatures are good, the humidity's right, they're shedding well because you have a nice moist hide in there. Once you've learned all this stuff, because there's a lot to know, there's still more to know. You want to keep updated. Reptiles have not been kept that long. We're always constantly learning new ways to take care of reptiles and new things to do with them. I am changing my home whenever I learn things. I used to keep Ángel on a repti carpet because that was what I was told to put him on when I first got him, and I continued doing research and realized I didn't like repti carpet for a lot of reasons. And now I'm keeping Ángel on half paper towel and half slate tiles. I really like this setup so far, and I think he's liking it. It's constantly changing, it's constantly learning, and I think as a good gecko keeper, you want to, as your confidence rises in your keeping skills, as you've learned things, as you see cool new things that you think your gecko might want to enrich their lives, it's good to try new things. Try changing up your gecko's substrate. Try giving them new hides. Try switching up their home a bit. Try feeding them different insects sometimes. Ángel was getting a bit restless, so I put him back in his home because I can tell that he doesn't want to be handled anymore today. But it is very important to make sure that you have done your research before you get a gecko, and don't close yourself off to learning new things. When you have your setup done and your gecko's doing good, that's great. Keep up with it. Keep the house clean. Make sure they're eating well. Track their poop, track their shed, and keep doing research to see if there's more you could do to enrich your gecko's life. I think it's really cool to become a part of the reptile community, learn more about what you're doing, learn more about what you could do for them. I'm looking into deep heat projectors right now. I'm looking into different kinds of substrates so Ángel could do some digging. There's so much that you could do. There's so much you could learn, and I think it's important to just continue doing research. If you can enrich your gecko's life, try and learn more. Just be the best keeper you can be. It's very rewarding to have a happy, healthy gecko. And that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to talk about some things I think you should consider before getting a leopard gecko. So thank you so much if you watched this whole video. If you have anything that I didn't mention that you think is really important to remember when keeping a gecko, let me know. And until next time, stay psyched.